Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 27.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have an interview with Josh Stevens. He is a test prep expert and he's going to give us a lot of great information about the ACT and SAT. And he also has knowledge about how international students can participate in the SAT and ACT and then pursue college here in the States. So that might be appropriate if you happen to be on a military base or part of an embassy or something where you're a U.S. citizen stationed abroad. And then he's also going to give us a lot of great information that's applicable to anybody and everybody that's looking to prepare or plan for the SAT or ACT test. Following that, I have a question where I give a quick answer about federal financial aid and how do you know how much you're eligible for and where does it come from. So we'll answer that question as well. As always, we take the notes for you, so show notes are available at www.tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/27 because this is episode 27, and obviously notes for all the other episodes are available as well. If you enjoy what you hear here, we would love it if you would go to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. And that's all for now. Let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Josh Stevens. All right, we're sitting down today with Josh Stevens. He is the Director of International Development at ArborBridge. ArborBridge is a test prep company that helps people all over the world. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Brad. Good to be here.
Before we jump into all things test prep, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Who I am, sure. So my background goes back to teaching high school. I then did some independent college counseling on and off for quite a while. I'm a journalist as well, covering urban planning. And with ArborBridge, my job is to reach out to mainly to schools and college counselors all around the world. We work with schools literally everywhere, delivering test preparation to American expats, to foreign nationals, to third culture kids who are bouncing between countries. And my job is to physically be on the ground, visiting schools, getting to know the international scene, and explaining to them what we do, and often explaining to them what standardized testing is and what test preparation is.
Great. So it sounds like you're pretty much the expert in these college entrance exams. I want to focus a quick couple questions. You mentioned the expat. So I'm immediately thinking of things like military bases and embassies. And did you get involved in that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm speaking to you today from Amsterdam, and I was in Brussels yesterday. So that gives you a sense of what I'm up to. But exactly, we work with many expat kids. Many of the military bases have their own high schools on the bases. Then the diplomatic kids, the State Department has a list of approved schools overseas that parents send their children to. Oftentimes, these are international schools that are incredibly diverse. You know, there could be kids from 100 different nationalities at some of these schools. It's a really interesting experience. But, you know, what I tell the kids and the parents at these schools, much like for the kids and parents in Milwaukee or LA or New York, this is a really complicated process. And without guidance, without good advice, it can be as baffling for the domestic student as it is for the international student. The one trouble international kids have is sometimes a student might be the only student in their class applying to U.S. colleges. They might not have that camaraderie and the sense of going with the pack. But otherwise, the anxieties and the questions and the aspirations are very much the same all around the world. Okay.
So if you are in a foreign country or military base and that kind of stuff, do you use the same SAT test dates or do you have special dates or how does that work?
In certain circumstances, certain testing centers might not have all of the test dates that we have in the States. The College Board dictates exactly which dates the SAT is given. They regulate it very heavily. It's given 7 times a year, about on a bi-monthly basis, off during the summer. even domestically, certain test centers may opt out of certain test dates, but otherwise, yes, the kids in Dubai are taking it the exact same date as the kids in Seattle or LA.
Great. All right. So if you are, I mean, I guess the other big challenge, and I'm sure you maybe can speak to this a little bit, but being so far away from the actual colleges, is there things that you would do differently from a testing or planning perspective?
Quite a few things. From the testing perspective, even if a student has all the dates available to them in their home city, some cities have plenty of testing centers, others have quite few. It's essential for a student to look up their local testing centers, double check and see which days are given and which days are available. Sometimes they fill up. It could be one classroom at the high school on the military base that a student off the base might get shut out of. So in that sense, they really want to plan well ahead. Many of these families travel a lot. They might be out of town on a test day. They only have 6 or 7 shots per year. What I tell every student is and that's partly because if they're not in an American high school, half the kids might be taking the exam on a given date. It's very hard to sort of miss that. If you're in a minority or if you're a kid on your own, you could miss that. So what I tell every student is look at the date that you're going to apply to college on. You could be a sophomore. I know that January 1st, 2017 is a long ways away, but it's still worth having the date in mind so that you can work backwards and look at the testing dates available to you. Think about how many times you might take the SAT or the ACT. And I often use those interchangeably. I might say SAT when I really mean SAT or ACT. Whatever the case may be, they want to look backwards from their ultimate application deadline and make sure they have at least a rough plan of when they will take the exam, how many times they might take the exam, and where and when. If they do that, then they're in great shape. Again, for the international student, I'd say there's sort of one more layer of complexity. And for those kids, it's all about being aware very, very early.
Right. So do the international kids, do they tend to take the SAT or the ACT? I know in the States it's like Midwest.
Yeah.
You kind of grow up with the ACT, and East and West Coast, you kind of grow up with the SAT, and that's just the way you do it. But if you're international, maybe you don't have those biases. I don't know.
You know, Brad, that's a really interesting question. As you and I know, in the States overall, it's about 50-50. There is no bias. The colleges accept both with open arms. A student might take one, might take the other. The Chicago kid might take SAT, or ACT. The California kid might take ACT. Total toss-up, whatever works for you as a student. Overseas, as a logistical matter, the SAT tends to be more popular overseas. Why is that? The main reason is there are more SAT testing centers overseas than there are ACT testing centers, period. It is simply more available. That doesn't mean that colleges prefer it better. It just means that's what kids happen to take. That becomes a bit of a snowball effect because kids overseas are more familiar with the SAT, I'm sorry. They're more familiar with the SAT because it's more available, and therefore that becomes sort of a cycle. Call it vicious, call it virtuous, whichever it may be. So the SAT remains more popular. There are even places, though, especially I've encountered in Asia, where there's some misconceptions about these exams and where people think that the ACT is an inferior exam, that colleges respect it less. That's just a stereotype. It is completely false, and every chance I get, I tell students and parents, it's more often the parents that have these stereotypes, that no, these exams are 100% equivalent, and whichever exam a student prefers and feels more comfortable with, that is the one they should take, assuming that it is logistically available to them.
Okay. Let me ask you your opinion now. And
Sure.
There's many opinions out there, and yours is just one of many. But
Yep.
What is your thought? I mean, it seems like we're in a little bit of an arms race when it comes to testing. You know, when I took the test 25, 30 years ago now,
Yep.
it was, what was my prep? Well, I sharpened some pencils and got a good night's sleep. Now it's like, well, I need to prep. And why do I need to prep? Because my competition is prepping. Would you agree with that? Or what's your thoughts on the kind of the arms race?
I think your question is definitely a sympathetic one. I'm sure the parents and students, I think parents are asking it all over the place. I think students may or may not ask it, sometimes to their benefit, sometimes to their detriment. I agree. I was in your boat. I took the test 20 years ago. I did a couple practice exams. I sharpened some pencils. I took it once, got a pretty good score, decided to take it again, got a better score. Who knows how? And that was that. And it wasn't a big deal. I think that there are a few reasons for why, is it an arms race? I mean, I think the whole application process is an arms race. And we can talk about whether that's good or bad. But, the fundamental fact of this entire process is there are more kids applying to colleges. Colleges' acceptance rates are getting lower. And understandably, if you're a college getting 30,000 applicants today versus 15,000 applicants 20 years ago, you've got to make tough decisions. And why, the SAT might as well be one of those criteria. So the stakes of the process are higher. As a result, the stakes of the test are higher. There are many different ways to test, to prep for the test. And every student is different. It doesn't mean that every student needs to do some vast prep program. But, I think the bottom line is that as long as the test is part of the application process, and as long as the applications do get, more competitive, then it does behoove a student to get a higher score. At what cost? That's a different question. But it is certainly true that a higher score at any given university will put a student in better standing.
Right. Yeah, and as I'm coaching parents too, I often tell people that ACT and SAT are one piece of the puzzle, but often admission draws, for admission, they draw a line in the sand somewhere. And if you have a, say an SAT of 2000, they might have drawn the line in the sand at 1900 and you're fine, or they might have drawn the line in the sand at 2100 and then, gee, if I'd have worked a little harder. And you'll never know. You'll never really know how close or how far you were. And this is admission, this is scholarships, this is all kinds of different things where it might make a difference.
The good side of the SAT is that it's an opportunity, right? You could be a student with a 2.7 GPA, maybe you've played a sport, but you're kind of an average student. But the SAT could be an opportunity to enhance your application. That 2100 coupled with a B- average, that could be your ticket into certain schools or to a school that might otherwise dismiss you if you had an 1800. But I think your point is really important, is that we will never know. There is no objective cutoff. I think some parents and kids do get wrapped up because they might get that 2100 and that might be fine for the schools they're applying to, but because they don't know that it's fine, they might take that extra exam. They might take that extra study session with a tutor or another class, which might be totally overkill. But at the same time, you can't blame someone for saying, you know what, I don't know what the cutoff is. I don't know what is or isn't going to get me into a college. So, as long as there are 2,400 points in the exam, I'm going to try, to get all 2,400 points. And, and that's a tough situation. And that is, where good college counselors come in, both good private counselors and good high school counselors, to ideally help give students, a sense of perspective and help a student figure out what a reasonable goal is in these tests, as opposed to just sort of randomly shooting as high as you can.
Right. So as part of the instructions I do, I always tell people, well, you need to have a plan. You need to have a financial plan for college. You need to have a test plan, a visit plan, make sure you're taking the right curriculum, a plan to figure out where you're applying. So let's talk about the test plan. It's, it's kind of a sub plan of overall college planning.
Yep.
But how often and which tests, and, let's use a couple examples. Let's say I've got the superstar student, competing for valedictorian, probably in the top 5, may end up number 1, may end up number 7 or 6 or something, but a really strong student, taking a lot of AP, doing really well, shooting for the stars as far as colleges are concerned, considering, maybe the Ivy League or some of the, at that level anyway. What do they do as far as test planning and test prep? When should they take the first test? What about the PSAT and the plan and the precursor tests? What advice would you give to a parent like that? When do they start? Yeah. How often, how do they know if they should prep and that kind of stuff?
I'd say, regardless of where a student, of what they're aiming for and what score they might want and what their background is, it's certainly reasonable for any student to take one of these exams twice, meaning 2 SATs or 2 ACTs. for sure. Maybe a third time. What I always tell students is if you take it multiple times, make sure there is a plan, that you're not just taking it once, sitting on your hands for 3 months and taking it again. The idea that your score will magically rise the next time, that's unlikely. So if you're going to take it multiple times, make sure you're part of a study plan between the times. The typical student, and I think this works nicely, will take their first exam either in winter of their junior year or mid-spring of their junior year. So for instance, the earliest you would normally take it might be January of 11th grade. You could study a little bit. You don't have to. You could take it fairly cold and see what happens. Then you get that baseline score. You now know where you're starting from. Maybe it's a 2100, maybe it's a 1500. Then you take that initial score. Even better, you take a practice exam. For instance, my company, we offer practice exams. Many companies do. If you take a practice exam beforehand, then you know your starting score. Then you can go into that official test in January, maybe April of junior year, and go for what we consider sort of a real score, a solid score. Then you look at that score. Is it as high as you want? If it's yes, you are done. No worries. If it's lower, then you study. Then you might take it again in June of junior year. Usually the last reasonable time you would plan on taking it is October of senior year. Why is that? Because November 1st is the early application deadlines. You want to have that score in hand before you apply. If you need emergency test dates, then you have November and December. I'm getting a little muddled here, but point is, if you take a good practice exam ahead of time, and you take an official exam sometime in the spring of junior year, and definitely that October senior year date, you should be okay. Maybe you throw in one more test date either in November for your regular application deadlines, or you start a little earlier, January of junior year. Anything much earlier, probably overkill. I'd rather you kind of study and keep focused on school. Anything later, like December of, or January of senior year, then you're getting too late. So I hope that made sense. I think the one takeaway from that is whether your first exam is a good practice exam or whether it is an official exam, use that first score to help set those goals. And then you can figure out what you need to do to get from that first score to what your ultimate goal might be.
Right. Now, is there any benefit for the PSAT or the plan? Are those reasonable things to start looking at to start?
Absolutely. I mean, what's nice about the PSAT and the plan is that they are mini versions of the ACT and SAT respectively. So they certainly help. They can give a student a rough estimate. What I would say is, take that PSAT in the fall of junior year. Some schools even offer it to sophomores. That can be your baseline. Then I would take a full practice SAT or ACT. The reason the full test is important is that a 4-hour test is very different from a 2-hour test, even if the material is the same. Your brain operates differently in the 4th hour than it does in the 2nd hour. But I think that one thing I would want to note, though, is that the PSAT and the plan are really purely for practice. There's a lot of rumor of, you can get a scholarship with a PSAT score or things like that. The only scholarships with the PSAT are national merit scholarships. Those go to a vanishingly small number of test takers. It's not the sort of thing you plan for. It's something that maybe drops out of the sky. If it does, that's fantastic.
Right.
But
I always tell people, if you've got the phenomenal test taker, really you're talking in the top 1 or 2%. So if your kid has been in the top 1 or 2% at, in the various testing, and all the no school kid left behind tests, there's various tests at school. If your student is top testing in the 99th percentile or the 100th percentile, then for sure you want to make sure you understand national merit and go for it with the PSAT as a junior. Because there is a big prize at the end for some. I've had a couple families get full rides at colleges because of how well they did on the PSAT. But that's that's a minority. Like I said, the top 1 or 2% of test takers.
And I would never tell someone to get their hopes up or to pin their, college future on a national merit scholarship, just because it is such small numbers.
Right. Let's transition a little bit about. Do you have any opinions on which test people should take, or should they take both? Or, I mean, I've heard of students working really hard on both tests and, end up taking 6 or 7 tests because they take 3 in each type. And
great question. I was in London 2 days ago for a college fair, and I got that question a lot because the ACT is becoming a little more popular, but still very mysterious. So I got that question more than ever before. To answer the question of which do I take, it depends on the student. There are certain students whose brains just work well with the SAT. Certain might work with the ACT. How do you find that out? You take practice tests. There are rumors and there are trends about what types of students or what types of thinking each different test appeals to. There are things like on the ACT, time is more of a factor. The questions are kind of more straightforward. So if you're the kind of student who can read a straightforward question, quickly get the answer, and move on, you might be great at the ACT. If you're the kind of student that likes to reason through questions, and even if you don't know the exact answer immediately, but if you work logically and you can discern the answer, well, the SAT might be better. In my experience, I think a lot of kids score pretty evenly. I'd say 80% of students, if they take both exams, they'll score fairly equivalent scores. And they publish sort of score concordances.
Right, and that's why most colleges will accept either score now. Is most colleges think in one test or the other as far as the way they operate, but they will take whatever test you give them and they'll convert it to the test that they're familiar with.
And the colleges are, they get 50-50 these days, so they're equally versed in both. I think the real key to this, though, and you mentioned the kids who might take each of them 3 or 4 times, I think clearly the best strategy is to pick your test early. Figure out which test you're comfortable with, commit yourself to that exam, study for that exam, take that exam, and don't go back and forth. You'll do so much better if you focus on one exam than if you try to hedge your bets. Because if you study for the ACT and you take it and get a decent score, and then you all of a sudden take the SAT just for the heck of it, it's not like your SAT score is going to magically skyrocket, especially if you've spent your time studying for the ACT. And if you do study for the SAT, you probably don't have as much time to study for it. So to me, going back and forth is fairly counterproductive. Kids have better things to do with their time. It's better to pick one and stick with it.
Okay. So I notice you guys also do some prep work for subject tests. So can you tell me what a subject test is first, and then kind of what's going on there?
Certainly. So subject tests get a little complicated. As their name implies, they are exams completely separate from the SAT or the ACT that test students on academic subjects. These tests are administered by the college board, so the same company as the SAT, but they're separate exams. They have all the basics. They have physics, bio, and chemistry. They have 2 different math tests. They have English. They have history. They have the languages. Those are meant for students to demonstrate their academic competency. Interestingly, only a handful of universities require subject tests. Generally, they're the most selective universities. All of the other universities, they might recommend subject tests. They might simply accept them optionally, but they won't require them. They won't even recommend them. Students get to it's totally up to students to decide whether to take them or not, unless they know they're applying to a school that requires them. Once they've decided to take them, generally, students may choose whichever subject test they want. And I always say, play to your strengths. If you're a great English student, take the English subject test. If you're a great physics student, take the physics subject test. We were talking earlier about scheduling and planning. If you know you will take subject tests, you have to factor that into your long-term schedule. You can take 3 tests at one sitting. Usually kids will sit only once for subject tests, often the end of junior year when that junior year material is very fresh in their minds. And then that's it. What I would say, though, is if you're applying to schools where the subject tests are optional, they can still be an incredible asset to you, because if you take them and score well, if you take them and get 700s or 720s or whatever it may be, that only enhances your application. If you don't score well, then fine, don't submit them. No worries.
Right. And now these subject tests are different than the AP tests.
Yes, they're often on the same subjects. They often might mirror the AP tests. But if you're taking AP tests, you're also taking separate subject tests. Yes.
Okay. So who administers the AP? Do you know? I guess I'm not familiar with.
They're College Board as well.
They are? Okay.
Yes. So same company, different exams.
So if you take the AP physics, and then you could also take the subject test of physics.
Absolutely. Yep.
And do colleges care which one they get, or can you use one for the other, or?
Well, again, if a school requires subject tests, then you have to do the subject test regardless of what else you're doing. If it's optional, if you go get a 5 in the AP physics, and you get a 750 on the subject tests, that's great. But certainly, if you feel good about that AP score can certainly stand in for what would be an optional subject test, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so it's
complicated.
Exactly. The landscape is getting more complicated.
Yes.
When it comes to testing. Okay. So obviously your company provides tutoring and test prep and those types of things. So what's a good indicator, and how much should you spend, and how do parents know when it's needed and that kind of stuff?
Good question. As you know, you can spend a little, you can spend a lot, you can do it many different ways. There's everything from self-studying with a book all the way through one-on-one tutoring. My company specializes in one-on-one tutoring. What I would say is no single method is perfect for everybody. I think a few things are important. For a student to do practice exams, practice is really important, becoming familiar with the exam. Even if a student does a practice test, one other thing I think is really important is doing a practice exam with experts, where you get feedback on that practice exam and you don't just get a score. If you do a practice exam in a book and all you do is total up your right and wrong and convert that to a score, you might say, great, I get an 1800. That doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you what you're actually strong and weak in. Even if you can discern strengths and weaknesses, you might not know why you're strong and weak. You might not know exactly the strategy for overcoming those weaknesses. So if you can find a good tutor who, even just to do one session and really review that practice exam in really fine detail, where they can point out things that you might not notice. If a student's doesn't want to spend a lot of money and wants to be economical, if you're going to spend any money, I would say spend it on a good practice exam and good analysis. We do that as a company. Other companies do it. That can be really, really helpful. Again, if you know you're being ambitious, then you want to be careful. That is, if you look to prep classes or you look to one-on-one tutoring, make sure that you have a sense of what that class hopes to accomplish or what that tutor hopes to accomplish. If you get a 1500 but you want a 2100 and a tutor comes to you and says, oh yeah, no problem, let's do a couple hours, you'll get the 2100, you should be very suspicious, because that would be a huge, huge jump. You want to get to know what that class is going to cover, what that tutor is going to cover, and why. For some students, a class might be great if that class covers sort of the basics and that student needs those basics. What I would say is that if a student is an outlier, if their score is quite low or if their score is quite high, a class might not work for them because the class might be generic. They might need more targeted instruction in specific areas. Then obviously there's studying from a book. I would say that books are great if a student is strategic about it. Some of those prep books are 500 pages long or more. You don't want to go from page 1 to 500 in order. You want to be strategic about pulling out the lessons and topics that you know you are weak in. And that can be sometimes very tricky because, again, those books are long and they're daunting. The last prep method I'll mention are things like online free lessons. As you may know, or as your listeners may know, the Khan Academy, which is famous for having thousands and thousands of lessons on everything, has just partnered with the College Board to provide free SAT lessons online. I think there'll be dozens, if not hundreds of lessons they're going to be posting on YouTube via Khan Academy. I have no doubt that those lessons are going to be good lessons with good teachers and they're going to cover the right bases. But again, among those dozens or hundreds of lessons, those lessons are only worthwhile if two things happen. One, if the student knows which lessons to focus on, and two, if the student is diligent about those lessons. One of the best things about one-on-one tutoring is that a tutor is there to police the student. They will set their tutoring time. They will say, hey, we've got to do this. If a student does online lessons, video lessons, the student has to take responsibility for actually doing the lessons and doing them in sequence, because the person on YouTube isn't going to be there, to tap them on the wrist if they fall behind and don't actually do it.
Right. Yeah. And I'm meeting with a lot of parents, and one of my opinions, and you can elaborate if you'd like, but is the student has to have some skin in the game too. You can spend all the money you want, but if the student doesn't care, it's going to be really hard to make a difference.
Yep. Brad, I think forget about testing. I think the whole process, self-motivate. There's no substitute for self-motivation. I wrote a blog about that very topic a few months ago, wherein when you meet a self-motivated student versus a student who is lackadaisical or who only does things because the parents nudge them, that self-motivated student is going to do better at every stage in the process and every stage of life. So the first thing I can say, and maybe this is tautological, but I would tell students, motivate yourselves. Find out what you want, why you want it, what schools you want to go for, what test scores you want, and let that propel you. Obviously, take the help from the parents, take the help from the college counselors, but the more a student relies on his or her own motivation, the better they're going to do no matter what.
So you sent me a bunch of links, and I'm going to put them in the show notes.
Please.
So that people have access to them. I guess there's information from ArborBridge, some of your articles, and the Khan Academy's in here. So we're going to get all that posted. So I appreciate the great information.
Certainly.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you if you have like 3 quick tips, and they could be related to the stuff we've talked about or unrelated, as far as what parents and students in the high school looking at college might do to make their life a little simpler, a little easier, get a little more bang for their buck, whatever it might be.
Sure. So bang for the buck, first of all. I tell every audience I got my hands on, read as much as you can. It's a lost art. Today's world, we got cell phones and iPads and everything else. I encourage kids, curl up with as many books as you can. Do it as young as you can. I would say to parents of younger students who are, thinking about all these different permutations, don't worry about all the different learning methods and classes and whatnot. Just have the kid read. That's the best thing a student can possibly do for the SAT and for everything else. I'll say it as many times as I can, many times as I need to. Second, as I said at the beginning, this is a tough process for everybody. Kids put a lot of pressure on themselves. They might have dream schools that they are so nervous about getting into. Often those nerves are counterproductive. Nervous students, nervousness, anxiety, it rubs off. It can result in lower test scores, result in worse essays. Kids don't want to be stress cases. The more a student can relax, the better they're going to do. And one way to relax is not to focus on the dream of a particular college, but to focus on the dream of a great education. If your goal is a great education and you apply to a bunch of schools, you will get that great education guaranteed. If you focus on a particular school, maybe a particular SAT score, that focus can be counterproductive. And finally, the third thing, and I alluded to this as well, please view these exams, these standardized tests, yeah, they're a drag, but they're a great opportunity. Don't think of, what if I don't get an 800 per section? Think of, okay, I'm starting from 0. How many points can I get? How many points can I get the next time? Think of it in terms of a positive, not in terms of a negative. Guarantee you'll do better than if your mentality is the other way around.
Great. Well, I appreciate the great information. If people want to learn more about you and or get in contact with you, what are the best ways for them to reach you?
Certainly. So encourage them to check out ArborBridge, www.arborbridge.com, like tree and bridge. They can email me at josh@arborbridge.com. I write on the Huffington Post. They can Google Josh Stevens Huffington Post if they want to see some of the stuff I've written. And again, the links that you mentioned, obviously go to the College Board, check out those Khan Academy lessons as well. And more than happy to offer those practice tests and to tell people more about what we at ArborBridge do. We are one of many, and glad to be known by you and your listeners.
All right. I appreciate all the great information, and we will talk soon.
Gladly. Thanks very much, Brad.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a question? Brad is accepting questions from his listeners now. Record a question at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and get it answered on one of the future episodes.
Today's question comes from a meeting I had a couple days ago with a couple parents who were trying to figure out college. And their question essentially was, well, we know we're going to qualify for some loans, so how do we go about getting those loans? Where do we do the applications? How do we know how much we're eligible for and all that kind of thing? So I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and talk a little bit about how the federal financial aid process actually works. Because for a lot of people, you're going to get awarded federal financial aid, and you need to understand how that works. So in general, federal financial aid is awarded by the colleges themselves. So the colleges can award you the 6 different federal programs, the grants, the loans, and the work study. As part of your overall federal financial application, when you fill out the FAFSA, it goes to the colleges. The colleges use the FAFSA to determine how much you're eligible for as far as federal aid. And they put that federal aid on the offer letter that they're going to send you near the end of your senior year. So sometime in about April of your senior year, you're going to get a financial aid offer letter from the college. And on that offer letter, there's going to be the federal programs that you're eligible for. So that could be Pell Grant, Supplemental Grant, Work Study, Direct Loan, Plus Loan, and Perkins Loan. So all those different programs, if you're eligible for them, will be awarded by the college. In addition to that, in many states, the state aid is also awarded by the college that you're attending. So if you're attending school in Florida and you're a Florida resident, you may be eligible for a Florida loan or a Florida grant or something like that. Or it's comparable if you're attending a Wisconsin school here in Wisconsin, you certainly are eligible for state aid potentially. Again, a lot of the state aid is very need-based, so there's a lot of families that don't get state aid. But if you were eligible for it, the colleges would put that on your offer as well. And then finally, on that offer from the colleges, they're going to put their own aid. If that particular college is going to award you a scholarship, whether it's need-based or merit-based, they may put that on your offer letter as well. Now, as a word of caution, there are many, many scholarships that go through the financial aid office, just as I've mentioned. But at some colleges, there's also scholarships that are completely separate from the financial aid process, where you need to apply separately and potentially win the scholarships unrelated to your overall financial aid. And some colleges, you do both. You get some scholarships through the financial aid office and some directly from some other scholarship process. All right, that's all we have for today, so we're going to wrap things up here. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I would appreciate it if you passed information about this podcast along to other families that you know of that may need help in college planning. So if you just send them our website or teach them how to listen to a podcast or whatever it takes to spread the word, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.